chips, that the prices on the current market right now can be as high as $360 to $400 per ounce, which, if you're on a fixed income such as Social Security, disability, or otherwise, would be more than half of one's monthly stipend. And as a result, I started this organization to bring some voice for those vulnerable hardship patients to the regulatory process. And that's partly why this session tonight is so close to my heart and so important, because if people aren't willing to come out based on what they believe and what matters to them to speak in front of these regulatory bodies, as boring as it may sound, then those bodies end up basically only hearing the perspective of the groups who have a vested monetary interest in being in front of them. And so that's partially why I'm so excited about this evening. And I think we have a few slides to go through, so I just don't know which button to click. So basically, that's what I was getting to with the quote that Joe helped me find here, which is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Because although you might meet a lot of benevolent people in this industry, in particular amongst the activist groups who are truly doing this to try to create an equal and level playing field for all participants in the market, you're also going to meet people who are only interested in protecting the interests of one business or one group of businesses. And those people, because they are not doing it on ideological grounds, are also going to be extremely well funded. And so not only are they going to come to it seeking to undermine the public good to facilitate their own profit, they're also going to come with heavy hitters because they can afford to manipulate the process. And so the reason why we're putting this testimony workshop on is to not just give you the tools to be able to testify in front of the commission, but to be able to do it in a way which will allow you to fight back against that monolithic leviathan that is these moneyed groups who are trying to impact the process. And so transitioning a little bit into the most effective way to do that when you're someone who's doing it from the heart for a cause that you believe in and you're speaking honestly. Tell your personal story. The commissioners who you're going to end up testifying in front of, or even lawmakers if you go to a hearing, read proposals and lobbying in the form of prepared statements almost every day of the year, and they read them from these corporate firms, then they come across as soulless. Each of you has an issue that you care about, probably more than one, and you all have a story that connects to why that issue had an impact on your life. And the most important part of effective testimony is teasing out in a short, concise, and effective manner not only your story, but why that story ties in to the regulation that you're trying to ask the commission to change, which is the context of this public comment session coming up in August.
So now we have a quick video to sort of demonstrate how you you personalize your story, how you tell your own, speak with your heart. Let's do.
Wait till it turns red. Keep moving it around. There you go. Wait. No.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh.
Almost there. A little bit. Come on, we may need your assistance.
Yeah, it's touchscreen.
Oh, it did. No, but it's
not working?
No. Oh, I got you. Boom.
All right.
Sorry, guys.
Good afternoon, Grant. How are you?
Chairman Hoffman, thank you very much.
A minute.
Good afternoon to the Commission, and thank you for affording me this opportunity to speak today. I myself am disabled and, for the most part, homebound medical patient. I was 26 years old and a graduate student at Boston College, 4 years into a postdoctorate degree studying a quantitative methodology to examine the cogency of public discourse in the context of the backroom deliberations of lawmakers and regulators. So, unfortunately, overnight in May of 2014, my throat began collapsing and my esophagus and airway began penetrating into each other. It affects nerves going into my face and my eye, and so I can't see very well and my face always hurts. In any event, I went through a painstaking 18-month process of hospitalizations, inpatient experiences, and general hell. By the end of that, I was on such a litany of medications that I can't even list them all. But anyway, about 18 months in, one of my doctors realized that things weren't going to get better, and they recommended that I try to use medical cannabis as a way to supplement some of the... Okay, so sorry about the audio problem there. It's our first time trying to use the speaker. But in any event, the reason why we showed you that video is because the way I started that testimony was I talked about where I was in life when, and I really personalized the way I told the commission about what had happened to me and how cannabis entered into my life. And you can't really hear it, but at one point, Chairman Hoffman said back to me, audibly, something like wow, or something when I was testifying. And that's what in, like the music industry, they would call a hook. When you're giving testimony, you have to give the commissioners who are listening to hundreds of these testimonies a reason to care about what you're saying. And the best way to do that is to develop your personal story in a short, concise manner and explain to them why what you're about to talk about is important to you on a real human and personal level. And so that's what we say when the next slide, which is another, and this is getting close to the end of the intro, but basically, when you go up there to speak, they can tell who's reading a prepared statement that they didn't write or that they had help writing, and who's telling them what they honestly feel based on their convictions. And the easiest way to come across as authentic is to be authentic and to tell what you already know to be the truth and your own personal experience. And don't hold back. Let them know you took the time to be there. It's your democracy, your country, and your republic, and let that come through in how you speak. And so I think we're now at the point where Joe's going to introduce some of our speakers who are going to tell you about some of the more intricate policy details, and there we go.
Yeah, so now we're going to hear from some community organization leaders. We're going to hear what their policy recommendations are so that we can take them into account when we're building our testimonies. So if you want to take some notes, we're going to introduce Kamani Jefferson with the Mass Rec Consumer Council.
Hey everyone. I wrote this like yesterday, so at an airport. So I'm just going to read it. But the three things that we're really pushing for is just municipal guidance and to make sure there's effective participation from the municipality. This whole process really, the key to it is what happens at the local level. And you ask anyone in the industry, the local level is running it. We're also going to be pushing for changing the security requirements around delivery, and then we're also pushing for changing some of the additional operational requirements around delivery, like pre-verification and things around the consumer. So I'll just read it. So, hello, Cannabis Control Commissioner. My name is Kamani. I am with the MRCC, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak about the draft regulations of 935 CMR 500. MRCC does have a few suggestions. Our first one is if a successful pilot program for social consumption is to happen in the Commonwealth, then the Commission should have a minimum of 10 to 15 municipal listening tours across the state on how this rollout will be implemented. And you need to hear specifically from the municipality themselves who plan on having delivery and having social consumption, how they plan on actually doing it. Also, the application that's required by the Commission in 500.101, which is one of the draft regulations, application requirements, it should be detailed as possible and be in collaboration with interested municipalities. So this is specifically saying, in this regulation, the Commission is saying that there's gonna be an application for the municipality to fill out if they want to be in the social consumption pilot program. The municipality won't know anything about that, needs more background information. So I think they should work directly with the municipality on that application. And if anyone's interested in social consumption, you should then go to the municipality and have that application. And all three, you, the commissioner, the municipality, could all work together if you're serious about social consumption. Number two, in 500.110, security requirements for marijuana establishments. It says economic empowerment applicants and social equity program participants who are going to deliver are required to operate with a body camera at all times. And the video of the delivery shall be retained for a minimum of 90 days and staffed with a minimum of 2 establishment agents. It doesn't make any sense. Essentially, how will it be feasible, economically feasible for many of these economic empowerment applicants and social equity program participants who are looking to get a license? We already see that it's been ineffective for them to get a license because of some of these barriers. You're creating more barriers, in our opinion, with these. So we believe these regulations, that regulation specifically, is very counterintuitive to what the commission is trying to do, saying it wants a successful pilot program, but I think that regulation might kill that. Also, finally, under 500.145, it's an additional operation requirement for delivery. Consumers will be required to pre-verify their identification before placing a delivery order. And it doesn't make any sense to me, or an MRCC, because why would a consumer who has been using the illicit market for the delivery needs, or why would a patient who may not be able to get there decide to go through that process? The illicit market is many times a phone call away, and the illicit market's not pre-verifying, a consumer, and it may deter consumers from actually getting delivery. And if we want this to be successful, we believe that that regulation should also be removed as well. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kamani. So, yeah, we'll give him a round of applause. Yeah, it's crazy the restrictions that they're trying to put on delivery when you look at other sort of delivery models like Drizzly. Have you guys ever heard of that? Alcohol delivery? Yeah. They don't have to do any of that crazy stuff, and alcohol is a lot more dangerous than cannabis, so. They, yeah. So the next. Yeah.
Well, you can't go into a dispensary without them showing your medical card. So I can understand if they want you to pre-verify if somebody's actually a patient, you know what I mean, or if somebody's of age to be smoking recreational cannabis. I can understand them doing that. But if they don't do that to alcohol, then they should be treating it the same way and not,
Right. So these are things to think about when you're writing your testimony when we do that little breakout group. So the next speaker we're going to have is Peter Bernard with the Mass Growers Advocacy Council. Let's welcome him. I specifically chose this photo because it's one of my favorite ones. It's just at a State House protest the other week. If we don't have places to consume socially, where do you expect us?
I used that as my profile picture for a couple of days, and then I got a call from my mom.
Oh, man.
So I don't care how old you are, you get a call from your mom, pay attention. All right, I want to talk to you guys about 2 things, because one of the things we're here to talk about is effective public speaking. This is something I feel I'm kind of good at. There's a couple of people that's been on the other side of the microphone that might attest better to that than I do, but I'm very comfortable with it. And you have to be comfortable with it, because if you're not going to get your message out. One of the worst things I ever see when I'm at a hearing: hello, my name is John Doe, and I am here to talk about aardvarks. Aardvarks are a very important part of... I'm already asleep. And so are the people you're talking to. So you have to have some inflection. You can't be monotone. If you have an accent as bad as mine, don't even try to hide it. It makes you a more genuine person. If I start using my R's just because there's a microphone in front of me, I'm not Peter Bernard anymore. I'm Peter Bernard, and I'm a fake piece of shit. I'm not going to have that. So you have to have some written testimony. It's always good to submit, and I believe in 1 page. And on that 1 page, you have 3 things. If it's your story, it's the beginning, the middle, and the end. A couple of paragraphs for each one of those points. If you're trying to bring different topics up, because Lord knows there's all sorts of things in those draft regs that we want to talk about. You might want to talk about more than 1. I limit myself to 3. and I'll put on a little cue card or a little index card or a little piece of paper in my hand what those 3 points are. You generally get 3 minutes, so you've got 1 minute for each point. I rehearse it in my head after I've written my written testimony while I'm sitting there. Because for you to listen to whoever else is up in the microphone, they're preaching to the choir talking to you. So you need to pay attention to what you're going to say when your turn comes up. You can't let what other people say change what you're going to say when you get up to the microphone. Then it changes your message. Even if you feel like it might be relevant, then you got to go back and change your written testimony, and you could throw yourself off in the middle of your presentation. The number one thing most people have a problem with is looking at a crowd. Raise your hand if you have a problem with that. All right, I see a couple of hands. I have a trick to that. When you're standing up there looking at those commissioners, there's 5 people in front of you. Doesn't matter who's behind you, you don't see them. If you're still intimidated by those 5 people, take turns giving them eye contact. That might sound difficult, but if you're giving that one person eye contact, you don't see anybody else. That whole, oh, imagine them in their underwear. No, that doesn't work. When your eyes are panning the crowd, if you feel intimidated, look at foreheads. It looks like you're making eye contact from a distance, but you're not, and you don't feel intimidated. I hope that helps you guys a little bit. That's my basic method. And a lot of times from those bullet points, I make it up as I go, but I've written that written testimony first to keep me anchored to it. That aside, we already talked a little bit about home delivery, and yeah, I don't find that to be something that's sustainable. I find that to be something that only works as a license for you if you already have a retail store and you're trying to diversify by creating a second company. And that's a great business move, but it doesn't solve the problem of anybody getting that license being actually be able to operate as an independent company and have enough margin left over. Because right now, the way it's written, that delivery service is tied to that store. They can only make a delivery when that order has been placed. That store isn't selling it to the delivery service for free, they're making a markup. So if they add even 10% to that, you've got to bump that up for your customers or your margin goes down. Now let's talk about the compliance stuff. I won't get into all the details about the video and all that other nonsense. It's expensive, and that's going to get passed on to the consumer too. My biggest point of contention as a grower with anything I've seen in the regulation is hardship cultivation for medical patients. This is so draconian. You've got to give up your Fourth Amendment rights because the police can come into your house whenever they feel like it if they think you're selling weed. You have to have the state come in and check out your stuff. You have to submit a grow plan. Basically, they want to regulate your home grow as if it was a commercial grow. It's preposterous. Some people will say, and rightly so, that some of these things are part of the medical law. The thing is, as I understood it, the commission isn't supposed to write any rules that are more stringent than what the DPH wrote. Well, the DPH committed something called an act of salutary neglect. And what that means in plain English is basically, there's a law on the books, but we're going to ignore it. Now, all of a sudden, they don't want to ignore it anymore. And if those of you who are Revolutionary War buffs such as myself, that's part of what set that off. The English weren't taxing all that bootleg rum that was coming up from the South, and then all of a sudden they decided to tax it, and it pissed people off. It's the same way with this law. They've ignored it, and now they're going to make a bunch of criminals out of people that have been growing legally since 2012, because the DPH didn't want to deal with all those things. They just issued a blanket memo that said, hey, if you've got your medical card, go ahead and grow what you need. Make it reasonable. Make it a 60-day supply. Keep it reasonable. Most people did this. So when I look at this set of regulations, I see the fingerprints of law enforcement, and I see the fingerprints of prohibitionists. Chief John Carmichael, who sits on the Cannabis Advisory Board, and is also one of the big chiefs of police in Massachusetts, really doesn't like cannabis. He likes home grow even more, and if he could kill it, he would. He complains in the press that he can't tell the difference between a home grow and a medical grow. In my opinion, if I'm showing him a valid MMJ card and he can look it up and check that it's valid, bye-bye, go away, chief. Have a nice day. I'm gonna smoke my stuff now. And that's probably what I'm gonna rant and rave about when it comes time. It'll be hard to keep that to 3 minutes, but I thank you guys for your time, and I hope what I said has been helpful.
Thank you, Peter. Well, definitely, we have to protect our patients' right to grow. We have to protect our ability to participate in the legal industry and actually have ownership as license holders. I like something that Peter brought up was the medical laws can be no more restrictive than the adult use laws, or no, adult use laws can be no more restrictive than the DPH than the medical laws. Well, basically, what I'm getting at is there's a section in the law, section 4A4, that says individuals that in communities that were disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs have to have full participation in the regulated market. So if we ever find instances of regulations causing excessive barriers, then that's something that we need to bring up because it is in the law that we have to be included. So that brings a perfect segue actually into Randall McCaffrey from C3RN, the Cannabis Community Care and Research Network.
Hey, Joe.
Hey.
All right. Thanks so much for having me here, guys. Thank you to MRCC. So my name is Randy McCaffrey, co-founder of Cannabis Community Care and Research Network, research and advocacy group in education in the state of Massachusetts in the cannabis industry. So to give you a little background of like my activism, it's been quite a bit. I was arrested at the 4th Freedom Rally for smoking a joint on the Common, and I think we're at the 30th now. So I've been doing this for a second.
OG.
What's that?
An OG.
Yeah. So I want to say that this, testimony work, it does work. So last year when the first set of draft regulations came out, our organization testified heavily around research licenses being put into the regulatory framework of the adult use. And I'm not going to say it was just us, but we did succeed as a group to get research licenses put in. So it does work, and the commissioners do listen, and your testimony is heard. So I guess I want to talk about like sort of C3RN's approach to testimony. As you can imagine, we take a sort of a scientific approach to what we do. There's a statistical hypothesis called the law of large numbers. So it's that, guess how many jelly beans are in the jelly bean jar, right? So if you ask an entire crowd how many jelly beans are in that jar, you're going to get answers from 40 to 4,000. But the unique part about that is if you take all of those numbers and you average it out and you divide by the amount of people, you end up within about 2% range of how many jelly beans are in that jar. So that's kind of how the approach that we take. So about 3 weeks ago, this group of 40 addiction specialists and child psychiatrists came out with a policy statement effectively saying to stop the social equity program because if you put a dispensary in a low-income neighborhood, it could cause greater health inequities. And quite honestly, we were outraged to hear that. So we threw a press conference at the State House steps and had roughly 36 speakers. And so what we've been doing is sort of taking that data of what everybody has said and compiling it and analyzing it and coming up. We're going to be releasing a report about that, and that will be probably where most of our recommendations will be coming from. It's, if you can see how that works, the common threads will tend to come to the surface. Let's see. Yeah, so I think the most, like, if I was to give any advice, I think the best thing you can do for yourself is to be prepared. Definitely write and rewrite your statement do your research on the actual regulations, cite the actual regulations when you are talking to them. I think that's really important. It makes it a little easier for the commission to understand where you're coming from. And in practice, practice in front of friends, and this, what you guys are doing here today, Joe, is exactly what needs to be done in order to have, just to be thoughtful and prepared in your statement and how that goes. So our recommendations will be coming out. I'm not going to speak directly to them just yet, because I think we want to really dig into, and actually we'll probably be releasing a survey of like what other people want. So yeah, so that would be my approach to how to testimony.
Thank you, Randy. And I also want to thank you because he originally had some slides, but I made him freestyle and he did a great job. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. Oh, and I also want to congratulate MRCC on becoming the social equity training vendor for the state. It's a long haul. C3RN was awarded with them, and we're really looking forward to working with the state and working together on these projects. And so yeah, thank you all for being here.
All right, so our last speaker is going to be Chanel Lindsay from Equitable Opportunities Now, who is also the chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board. And so let's welcome Chanel.
Hey everyone. Good evening. Hey Joe, how's it going?
Going good.
Great. So, testimony is coming up, the hearings. We have done a lot of work so far, and I think we should just take a moment to reflect and congratulate each other for the work done so far. It's a lot of work doing this. MRCC, all of the other groups and people that have worked on this so far, and the fact that we have exclusivity for these license types, and understanding that has never happened before. So I think that that's a great place to start when we're thinking about testifying. But when it comes down to what we really need to think about pushing for next and thinking about next steps, because I think we can all agree that this is like a great first step, that delivery is going to be exclusive for our groups, and that we'll have an opportunity to kind of show and prove, right? What we've seen is a lot of concern about whether this can be done right, and overcoming law enforcement and just general concerns and really misunderstandings about what cannabis delivery specifically and social consumption really is. So certainly a focus on standalone delivery, and a plea to the commission to really continue to work on the delivery framework within these 2 years, so that by the time that it's time to rethink and rework these things, that we will be prepared for standalone delivery. I think that's a great way to approach thinking about testifying. I think the problems with the current setup long term are pretty obvious, right? Having to deal with a retailer, being at the mercy essentially of whatever partner you have. And what do we think is really going to happen at the end of 2 years when that partner has the opportunity to move on beyond us? So again, I think this is a great stepping stone to get to what we really know, that entrepreneurs, from marginalized communities and patients, adult users really deserve, which is delivery from standalone retail shops. And so I think that personal stories of how difficult it has been to get retail space is really, really important for the commission to hear, because I know that a lot of people have been going through that, the fact that it is almost impossible to find any place where you could actually have a retail location. So I think that plays into a lot of the need for standalone delivery, and also talking a little bit about the fact that And again, this is things that we'll be talking about and pushing for on the advisory board as well. The fact that standalone delivery is as secure as a retail location, and that track and trace and all of these other things flow directly and apply the same way as they do in the retail environment. So to me, that's the challenge that we have to overcome in the next whatever year, 2 years, however quickly we can convince the commission and the public at large that these standalone delivery are, important from an equity standpoint, but also really just part of a comprehensive, cannabis industry and in a regulated environment. Of course, we will, along with MPAA, be pushing for patient access and rights and that kind of thing. And I did want to take a moment, though, to talk about the folks that are a little bit too afraid to testify. Because I think there are a lot of people out there, a lot of people are vocal, and I think that's great. But I think that there is a huge power in the person that attends with the person testifying, or the group that attends with the person testifying. I think that there are a lot of people who don't realize that their presence alone can be so powerful. And I think that more of our family and friends need to come with us while we're testifying, because it does power, there is serious power in numbers. And so I think that I would encourage people to not only prepare their testimony, but encourage their friends and family to also join them, because it's very, very powerful to have a story about how you and your family in particular, a lot of these enterprises are family enterprises, right? People that are pushing for licenses, it's not just you, it's your family, it's your children, your aunts, your uncles that are also going to be benefiting from this. So that is powerful stuff, and I would just encourage people to do that.
Thank you, Chanel. Thank you so much. This is the civil rights movement continued. So we're continuing to fight for economic inclusion to be able to survive like everybody else. So yes, continuing to be vocal about that. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chanel. So now we are quickly going to jump into just a quick presentation on testifying. Just give you some tips on how you can structure your testimony, how you can prepare, and how you can make an effective one coming up in August. So I'm just going to do these next 3 slides, and I'll pass it over to Grant. So I put a bunch of sheets over here if you want to follow along, and you can follow along as I go. So what are these meetings for? The Cannabis Control Commission is continuously developing regulations for the cannabis industry, for the adult use cannabis industry and the medical industry. So these regulations dictate how marijuana businesses operate, how entrepreneurs are supposed to follow certain protocols. So in order, essentially that is what these meetings are for, is to create the industry that businesses and entrepreneurs are going to be a part of. So why are these meetings important to show up and testify at? Well, only a community member understands what the community needs. Right now, we have opposing interests that are showing up to hearings, and they're pushing for things that are detrimental to equity and inclusion of people from our communities. So that's why it's important to show up so that our interests are represented and that what the industry that we want to see actually comes to fruition. So how do you find out about the Cannabis Control Commission public comment sessions? So on the Cannabis Control Commission website, that is masscannabiscontrol.com, you will find a section, the public documents, and it's like a very important, super critical link or web page if you're trying to get into this industry, you're trying to just stay informed. They put all the most important relevant information on their public document page, so that's something that you should check religiously, and they'll post notice of public meetings, so that's where you can find the most relevant meetings that are going on, as well as MRCC on MA Consumers on our social media platforms will always post an important cannabis meeting or calls to action so that you can be a part of that. So how do these meetings work? Usually a sign-up sheet is provided at the beginning and gives residents an opportunity to sign up for the opportunity to speak for 1 to sometimes 5 minutes. but just depending on how many people there are. So I usually plan to speak for like 1 to 3 minutes, try to keep it very short and concise so that I don't lose what my main points are. And then how should your testimony be structured? So in our opinion, the best testimony is short and sweet and to the point, combining factual information with a hint of personal experience. And so ideally, the 3 main points that you want to hit when you're giving your testimony is who you are, what you're pushing for, and why this is important. And why this is important backed up with statistical information, clinical studies, anything that can help strengthen your argument. And finally, how do you find out about the cannabis control? Actually, I think I did this slide twice. I'm sorry. So now we're going to move on to writing your speech. Grant's going to lead us through this.
Yes, you'll forgive me. Part of my disability is that my throat doesn't function well, so sometimes I swallow air and can't talk for a second, so forgive me. So when it comes to actually preparing your testimony, there's 2 ways to go about it. If you're an expert in what you're going to talk about, the best thing you can possibly do is go up and explain with a short notes on a note card how you feel about the topic and what you're going to say. But if you're someone who is not familiar with public speaking, it's good to sort of have a rundown of the format of how you're going to testify. So these hearings, out of respect for the process, there's a certain way that one approaches the commission when called to testify. And so the best way to start one's testimony are Commissioner Title, Commissioner Doyle, Commissioner Hoffman, Commissioner McBride, and Commissioner Flanagan. It's hard to know them if you don't go often, but it's good to know the names. So when you greet them, they expect you to transition from that into who you are and why you're there. And the best way to present your story, as we were talking a little bit about earlier, is to just speak what you already know to be the truth. So if you're talking about your experience with cannabis, explain to them how you found cannabis. Try to do it in a short and concise manner. If you're explaining to them your experience in business, explain to them how you got into the industry, explain to them the challenges that you've had, because as strange as it may seem, those personal experiences don't always get all the way through to the commissioners, and so your experience may be the first time that they're hearing about a given issue. Some commissioners may know more than others on specific topics, but knowing how to relate that experience to the regulation is then the next transition. If you are going to use a piece of evidence, in particular, for example, in the Journal of the American Medical Association last week, a study came out showing that in states with legalized cannabis, youth consumption rates go down markedly. If you're going to cite something like that, especially at a public hearing, it's good to know the title of the study that you're citing, the journal title, and when it was published, because if anyone goes back to look through the record, that gives them an easy way to just look at your evidence right away. And at the end of your testimony, it's a good opportunity to review your main points and to leave an impression. And so just a quick summary of what you said to the commission and what you want them to remember is always a good way to end. We can skip this as we're short on time. So in terms of actually preparing, some of us can kind of just go and speak as we need to, but if you're the type of person who benefits from preparing, not only is it good to be a subject matter expert on the regulations you're going to be proposing, but it's good to practice your testimony. Whether you do this in front of a mirror by yourself, with a family member, friend, roommate, partner, whether you call someone on Skype and do it through video call, getting the words out ahead of time will oftentimes make it a lot easier to seamlessly deliver them when you're going live, so to speak, in front of the commission. And part of that comes down to not over-preparing. You don't need to run through a memorized speech. That'll come off as robotic and monotone. Know the main points that you're going to make and have given the speech a few times before you get there. And that will give you a lot more confidence going in to make the comments. Using note cards, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, can also be helpful if you don't have a full written testimony, just bullet points. And finally, on the day of, a lot of you will have gone to testimony and hearings on previous occasions, but it's good to get acclimated with the environment that the hearing is going to occur in. And the Cannabis Control Commission in particular does not always meet in the same place when testimony is happening. So it's, for example, it can happen on Federal Street, Milk Street. It sometimes happens in law schools. The Springfield one on August 15th is at the Western New England School of Law, for example. And so it's good to get there early, to get acclimated with the environment. It will be a lot more seamless for you to deliver your testimony if you're comfortable with the environment that you're in. Likewise, there's a sign-up sheet that goes the commission prepares to hear public comment. And if you're there as well, there's a testimonial style that comes along with being in an isolated location with a microphone speaking. So the Cannabis Control Commission will sit you with a microphone. It changes depending on the venue, and you'll be expected to speak into the microphone, which will play through speakers and onto a recorded stream that they put up, because commenting in public becomes part of the public record. So learning how to speak at a distance from the microphone based on the volume of your voice is crucial, and it's something that you pick up with practice, which is another benefit of the fact that we'll be doing a live testimony prep tonight in a few minutes.
Yeah, I've definitely done testimonies where I'm speaking over here and like you can't hear the whole testimony, and I'm like, dang. So like the next time I'm gonna do better and speak here and like speak very clearly into the mic. Like, so you learn every time you get better.
And just as a final thing, this doesn't come up so much in terms of the Cannabis Control Commission, as they don't really question the public, but at some hearings where you may give testimony, whether it's a local city council or the legislature, sometimes they will engage with you as a witness and ask you questions. And if you're ever presented with that situation, answer questions as honestly as possible. You probably won't be under oath, but if you are, then you absolutely answer them as honestly as possible. And if you don't know an answer, say I don't know, and never get combative, and don't attack other people. Even if you're being critical of the commission itself, phrase it in diplomatic parlance to the extent that you get your point across without engaging in personalities. And a personality is anything that is a personal attack. So don't attack the commissioners, even if you're very passionate about the subject. Try to focus on the argument, not the person involved. And with that, I think that we're going to introduce the next segment.
Yes, so right now we're going to take basically what we all heard and we all learned, try to break up into groups of 3, and then after 30 minutes of some creating structures and testimonies, then we have opportunities for people to present their testimonies and just get comfortable with the idea of public speaking. If maybe you can get some feedback on your testimony, and it will help you prepare for August. So if we can now start breaking into groups of 3, if there are people that you know, if there are new people that you want to meet, and let's try to.
And just a note before you do that, when you do break off into your groups, pick a person who's going to actually do the testimony. We'll have one person from each group actually doing a mock testimony. Try to limit it to 3 minutes. And so over the course of the next 30 minutes, take some time to write down what your testimony might look like, and it's a great opportunity to practice it in front of a live audience. So,
I'll be walking around. We'll have some people walking around to help out. Yes.
And Hillary King is back there, and will hand out notebooks if you want to write down your testimony. So thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you in about half hour.
Yes.